Hello and welcome. My name is Bellhäuser and I'm an educational psychologist at the University of Mainz, Germany. In this video, I'm going to present to you our latest work on daily fluctuations in motivation. We asked 105 students to fill in a daily learning diary over an entire semester in order to find out the determinants and predictors of their daily academic motivation. In other words, the question is, can we predict today's intrinsic and extrinsic motivation based on the self-regulated learning yesterday? Together with Björn Mattes and Patrick Liborius, we published this paper recently and you can download it for free under this link. Academic motivation is an influential factor in students' learning and performance in school and university. This has been investigated in a large number of empirical studies. However, the majority of these studies has been conducted with a focus on between-subject differences in motivation. In contrast, within-subject fluctuations, that is, intra-individual changes in motivation from day to day, have been studied much less frequently. Our goal was therefore to collect data on the daily changes in motivation and to link them to learning-related variables from the previous day. We use the process model of self-regulated learning as our theoretical framework. In this model, we divide the learning process into three phases: the pre-action phase, the action phase, and the post-action phase. In the pre-action phase, the students set their goals and make plans how to achieve them. In the action phase, the actual learning takes place, and in the post-action phase, the students reflect on their learning process and ask themselves whether they are satisfied or not. The central assumption of this model is that learning is a cyclical, iterative process, which means that the outcome of the post-action phase influences the next pre-action phase. Based on this theoretical framework, our first hypothesis is that constructs from the pre-action phase, such as planning and self-efficacy, and from the action phase, such as time investment, effort, concentration, or procrastination, have an influence on study satisfaction at the same day. Our second hypothesis is that study satisfaction at the end of one day, in turn, has an influence on next day's motivation. That is, if you are satisfied with your learning results, you are more intrinsically motivated and less extrinsically motivated. Both of these hypotheses have been investigated in the past. What is new in our study is that we conceptualize this as a mediation effect. That means that constructs from the pre-action phase and the action phase have an influence on next day's motivation mediated by the post-action study satisfaction. Exploratively, we also investigated whether there are direct effects of the pre-action phase and the action phase on the dependent variables that are not explained by the mediation effect. In order to investigate these hypotheses, we reanalyzed data from a paper that we published previously in Learning and Instruction. 105 students from a technical university in Germany kept a digital diary daily over a duration of 22 weeks. The study took place over an entire semester, that is, both the lecture period and the non-lecture period. Students were asked to fill in the diary in the morning and in the evening, and they were incentivized for doing so. The resulting data was analyzed using multiple level modeling. with level 1 being the days and level 2 being the students. Before the diary phase started, we asked students to fill in an initial survey in order to collect control variables such as study load, study satisfaction, trait intrinsic motivation, and trait extrinsic motivation. The morning diary consisted of several single item scales. First of all, we had the two dependent variables, state intrinsic motivation. Today I'm looking forward to my studies and dealing with its contents, and state extrinsic motivation. Today I'm driven to study mainly by the pressure I have. Furthermore, we collected data on the pre-action phase, planning, and self-efficacy. In the evening, we asked students about their action phase, that is, effort, concentration, and procrastination, as well as about their post-action phase, that is, our mediation variable study satisfaction. We analyzed the data from the lecture period separately from the non-lecture period. In this presentation, I'm only going to show you the data from the lecture period. Also, I'm going to limit the presentation to the dependent variable intrinsic motivation. In the first step, we wanted to show that the pre-action phase and the action phase really had an impact on the post-action phase, that is, the study satisfaction. As you can see, this was the case for all variables except for planning. The next step was to show that study satisfaction from yesterday really had an impact on intrinsic and extrinsic motivation in the next morning. As you can see, this was the case for intrinsic motivation. The last step of the mediation model was to show that the effect of the pre-action phase and the action phase on the dependent variables was indeed mediated by the post-action phase study satisfaction. This can be compared to the multiplication of path A and path B, and as you can see, it turned out that for almost all variables this was the case, except for planning. Exploratively, we also wanted to know whether there are any direct effects of the pre-action phase and the action phase on the dependent variables beyond the mediation effect. As you can see, this was not the case, at least not for the intrinsic motivation in the lecture period. We did find such effects in for the extrinsic motivation and also in the non-lecture period. Taken together, we found evidence that motivation substantially fluctuates from day to day. This means that diaries seem to be a reasonable approach for measuring motivation instead of using questionnaires. Further, our data seem to confirm our hypothesis. The components from the pre-action phase and the action phase seem to really predict study satisfaction, that is the post-action phase. This seemed to be true for all components except for planning. And this study satisfaction in turn really predicted tomorrow's intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. While both of these two findings might not seem very new to you, the third finding was that this actually takes place in form of a mediation effect. And this is something that hasn't been studied before. A central idea of self-regulated learning is that it takes place as a process which is iterative and cyclical in nature. And we believe that our data show strong support for this idea. We replicated this finding both in the lecture period and in the non-lecture period, which makes it even more robust. Of course, our study also has its own limitations. For instance, we used only self-report data and one-item scales, so in
future studies this could be improved. And also you could say that our sample was rather small, but keep in mind that we had a large number of measurement points and the focus was on intra-individual fluctuations and not so much on inter-individual differences. We believe that our findings might inform the development of future SRL interventions. On the one hand, you could use our findings to create SRL trainings, or on the other hand, you might even give an individual automatic feedback within the digital diary with instructions on how to proceed with the learning process. At the end of this presentation, I want to take the time to promote open science. I believe that we need more open longitudinal data sets with large sample sizes that can be analyzed by anyone across the world. A great example for such an approach is the Many Moments Consortium, which is a group of researchers that will collect data together and will make these data sets open access.
Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions and comments.